welcome everybody to the One Podcast. I'm your host, David Medina, and I have the absolute amazing pleasure to have my brother, this gentleman I met probably less than a year ago, or maybe a little more than a year ago, out here in Arizona, and he's a super talented, just real, and just a special guy. And we're going to get into it with him. Please welcome Blake Mathews. What's happening, brother?
Just present, man. Thank you for inviting me into your space. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. We're going to get into some topics, but first I want to get to know, you're originally from Arizona, right?
Born and raised.
Give us a little bit about your background, like whether that's your cultural background or sort of how your childhood was generally.
Sure. So I was born in 96. Most people don't know that about me. I'm 26 years old. Born here in Phoenix, Arizona. I was raised Jewish, and Judaism was like a foundational core element of my childhood. That was really essential. I think it played a huge role in who I've grown into today. I strayed away from and rejected religion, I think, as a lot of people do. Around 13 is where my story really, that's kind of actually the earliest memory I have. I don't remember much before 13. 13 was the year that I discovered drugs and music. My dad bought me my first pair of turntables, and I really turned to drugs at the same time, as a way to make friends. I was kind of odd. I was a little bit weird, I was exploring my sense of fashion and was ridiculed for dressing differently. Turning to drugs was kind of like an easy way for me to find something that I could have in common with some of these other people, So for me, my experience of music all throughout my teenage years, up into my early 20s, it was just coupled, side by side, music and drugs. And a lot of nightlife and entertainment, is that way, just culturally speaking, So, from there, I graduated high school here. I went to an art school, Arizona School for the Arts downtown, studied theater and acting. So I'm an actor, an aspiring actor as well. I love storytelling and narrative and all forms of entertainment, specifically that have a real purpose and underlying message and meaning, So yeah, I graduated high school, moved to Nashville, Tennessee in 2014 to study business administration with a focus in the music business, and I minored in audio engineering. So Nashville was an amazing opportunity for me to meet new people, develop as a songwriter and an artist. Yeah, and just kind of evolve as a human, Yeah. All along the way, I've been pretty involved in event production. Throughout my teenage years, I was a DJ, so I kind of got into DJing weddings and bar mitzvahs and events and eventually house parties and some clubs and stuff like that. And I've always wanted to create community, That was, I think, another thing that drew me towards event production. I could provide music, but I could also bring people together. So I did a lot of that in Tennessee. and eventually, I mean, I'm sure we'll get more into it, but I had a moment when I eventually realized that I had like a drug problem.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I had kind of managed my usage like all the way up to that point through my teenage years and my early 20s, and it was just time for me to make a change, you know. So I graduated college in 2019, and within 2 months of graduating college, I went into treatment in a rehab facility in Tennessee.
Okay.
I did 120 days of residential treatment in Tennessee, and then part of my treatment was in Florida as well. And moved back to Arizona in 2020. And now recovery is a big part of my life now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a calling for me. I feel, it's a way that I can give back to people who have struggled with some of the same things that I have struggled with.
Yeah.
And yeah, mixing and matching all sorts of years and concepts and stuff, but that's a little bit of my background.
Yeah. So let's go back a little bit to, because you talked about your Jewish heritage, and then you had music and the drug use part of it. How did that impact, your relationship with your parents, but also like how deeply ingrained was the Jewish culture for you, in that obviously it was looked down upon as far as like drug use and stuff. Like how did that sort of interact in your childhood, and what issues did that bring up for you? Or
That's a great question. There was a period of time where no one really knew that I was using drugs, So it didn't really cause much of an issue at that point. I was very involved in a Jewish youth group. I joined, it was kind of like a Jewish fraternity here in Phoenix, and Scottsdale it was based as well. So around the age of 13, I joined a Jewish fraternity, and there was leadership and mentorship within the fraternity. But I was also provided an opportunity to leave the house twice a week to go attend fraternity style events and, brotherhood, team development. I learned a lot about brotherhood and leadership within a Jewish setting. But it was also an opportunity for me to go and get high with these people that I was learning with and growing with. But drug usage, specifically marijuana at that point, was just kind of a part of what we did. At that point, I didn't really see a problem with it. I was still going to school. I was, involved in my Jewish youth group. Eventually, I, came to grow into a position of leadership in the youth group, and I mentored some of the younger guys the same way that I had been mentored. But I also kind of cultivated some of the same self-sabotaging habits in the younger guys that were coming up. It was just kind of it was like a safe space for me to learn and grow, but also develop like the beginnings of a drug habit, I was bar mitzvahed at 13, which is, it's a rite of passage in the Jewish tradition. It's essentially like a public acknowledgement of like my commitment to making the world a better place, essentially. So all my family from all over the country came together to celebrate this. I read from the Torah, and later that night, I got high. And it was actually around this time that I was also introduced to LSD. At 13, I took LSD for the first time. And my introduction to LSD, it was a friend of mine had an older sister, and she just kind of casually asked us, like, hey, do you guys want some acid? And I didn't know what that was. I didn't have any sort of drug education or life skills development, preparation, prevention, for when these types of situations arose. And my first question was, how much does it cost? and she, I mean, it was dirt cheap, especially compared to how much I was spending on weed, so that kind of hooked me. Like, I didn't really know what it was, but I liked it. It lasted a lot more, or a lot longer than weed did. And it was a lot more intense, so eventually, it started causing, my parents kind of started recognizing that I was not the same, like my behavior and my integrity, like I was lying a lot. It was almost like I was living two different lives, but I was too young to really consciously and morally, like, I suppose, like, take responsibility for that, or even be aware that that was happening.
I was at 13?
Yeah, like 13, 14, 15. I was kind of like divorcing myself from the reality of my life. I was just kind of like, the reality was I was showing up to family dinner, lying about where I was going. I mean, it behind the surface, I wasn't living an honest and, faithful life, like, in any way. But I don't even think I was fully aware, like, of how destructive that was to my relationship with them. It wasn't really until I went into rehab that I kind of did the work to realize, like, how disrespectful, like, my behavior was, and how much damage I caused, to my family.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a tough space to be in as a 13, 14, 15-year-old. Because like you said, like, you don't really know the idea of responsibility yet. And you're in the space of, like, wanting to fit in, and you're in the space of, like, particularly with drug use, like, getting lost in things. And so, yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting space, and I think it's a space that a lot of young kids find themselves in, where they don't really know where to sort of go with these things. So, to get back to your place in the story of redemption, right? At what point did you sort of realize, if you can walk us through, like, at what point did you start to realize, wow, I'm in deep into something that's affecting my life?
The first thing that comes to mind was the death of a friend of mine, which was in 2015, December of 2015. I lost a friend of mine. He lived here in Arizona, and without going into too many details, it had to do with drugs, and it just kind of dawned on me, like, there's, like, nothing good is coming from this, so that was the first time I tried to get sober, was 2015. One thing that I'm really grateful for is I always had the core principles that were instilled in me in my youth to kind of fall back on. Like, when I realized that I had gone too far astray, or even if I was just having a bad day, to be honest. It didn't have to be such an intense, like, pitfall. Like, even if it was just kind of a rainy day, like, the core principles of service and, integrity and compassion and, especially the component of ritual. That's something that was taught to me through Judaism in my youth, is how important it is to have. There are daily rituals, there are weekly rituals. Observing the Sabbath and Shabbat is a weekly ritual, which for me, there's a spiritual motivation. There's, something that compels me, that's, I think, deeper than, the practical aspect of daily life. But there's also a really, really practical element. It's not just religious, it's not just spiritual. The Sabbath is a chance to put my pen down in a sense, and kind of observe, what have I created or what has been created through me. It's a chance for me to set myself apart from the world that I'm living in so that I can kind of observe it, right? We talk about like observing the Sabbath. So, 2015 or so, I dove a little bit deeper back into my spirituality and some of the rituals that I had learned in my youth. That was one of the moments when I realized like it was time for me to try to get sober. But I didn't know how I was going to do it.
Yeah.
It was one thing to realize I needed to. It was another thing to know who to talk to or where to go to.
Right.
And I didn't at the time,
Yeah. I mean, that's such an important point to make, because taking that pause and those rituals throughout the day. I remember when I was in high school, I had an English teacher, and he was Orthodox Jew, and but one of the best teachers I've ever had in my life. And I remember distinctly going into the library, and he would just be sitting there doing nothing. Like he was just staring at, to me, it just seemed like he was staring into space. And I was like, what is he doing? Like, why is he just sitting there? And one of the things he taught me was like this, he would take the moment of the day, even if he was in school teaching, like his lunch break or whatever it was, like he'd just sit and observe and just sit quiet and think. That's what he used to tell me. Like, I just think. That's all I'm doing. And to me, it was like, I didn't know it back then, but I took it on as like a meditative practice. Like, oh, that's what that meant back then, even though I didn't know what meditation was back then. So it's incredibly important to like make that point of like, taking those rituals, because those are the things that ground us, right? Those are the things that allow us to actually stop and observe what is going on in our lives, and like, so that's super important. So the topic we have on this episode is redemption. And one of the things that I was kind of thinking about it for myself, like what redemption is. And the proper definitions of them is right to recognize what you've done, accept responsibility for those things, and come to terms to either not do it again, apologize where appropriate, and then resolve to be a better human being. And for me, I was like, man, I don't have a redemptive moment like in my life, in a sense of, and what I was thinking about was like I was attaching it to this big thing. Like it has to be this big, huge thing in order to feel redeemed. What I realized was redemption for me is, it can be a very, very small thing. It could be just having compassion for myself and sort of going past whatever past patterns that I have, or beliefs, or how I've carried myself. So for you, like, I know, you mentioned recovery. What's redemption for you? What has been sort of that redemptive moment where it was a pivotal point for you and sort of shifted your life?
Man, redemption. I think redemption it's like a process, Like it's similar to forgiveness, actually. Like I've been doing a forgiveness practice recently, which I think it's actually an important part of redemption, is forgiving ourselves to be able to move forward and to release attachment to the sin or whatever it is that we are being redeemed from. But like with forgiveness, I think traditionally, at least the way that I learned to forgive was just to say it, like I forgive you. But really, that's just the seed. Like that is that to say I forgive you, or to set the intention, that's the seed, and the seed needs time to grow. So give yourself compassion. Like if you're having a hard time forgiving yourself or forgiving someone or accepting someone's apology or offering forgiveness, like just know and trust that that's a process, it doesn't happen immediately. And same with redemption. I don't particularly subscribe to like the concept of, well, well, I'd rather share like what I do believe. So I think sin is the idea of sin actually has like it can have a really important utility in our experience outside of like the religious context. So sin translates to, I think it's Latin, I'm not sure exactly, but I've learned that it translates to missing the mark. So, what are you aiming at? If what are you aiming at? And if you miss the target, if you miss the mark, that's a sin. So redemption for me has been, a process of like identifying my sin, like where did I go wrong, and how can I realign myself with a goal or a target that I can actually aim for. Because if I'm not aiming at like anything, like of course I'm gonna miss the mark. It's kind of like having a dart and just like throwing it blindly and expecting it to like land on
bullseye.
The bullseye. So redemption's a process. I think it requires a little bit of faith and intention. Like I don't necessarily know where I'm going, but that's okay, and I'm gonna do my best to define my target. And then it also requires action. Like committing to some sort of practice that will help me get there. Yeah, a very specific example has to do with like my health and my body. I recently recommitted to moving my body and just paying it the attention and the respect that it deserves. And this is an act of redemption. For a long time, I've neglected my body. When my body's told me that I need to go to the restroom, like half the time I just sit there and like power through whatever it is that I'm doing, and act as if my body isn't speaking to me. Like it's disrespectful. Don't ignore, the messages and the signals that your body is telling you. Honor those messages, honor those signals. They may not be spoken to you in English, but they're signals and messages nonetheless. So my commitment to honoring my body, one of the actions that I'm taking towards that is running. Right? I've been running lately, and it dawned on me like last week while I was running, like I was like, I need to run a marathon. It just hit me. I was like, man, I can't deny it. Like, so imagine that as the bullseye. Now I have a target. I have an ideal that I'm moving towards. And, I wondered, I think there are many ways to look at it. Some people might say that you don't need a target and that it's not about the, what do they say? It's not about the destination, or it's not about the target. It's about the journey.
Yeah.
And I think there's value in like both of those perspectives, but redemption from the sin that I've experienced in my life, the sin missing the mark, like it requires me to define my target. What do you think?
I mean, you said it beautifully. Like, I love that idea. Like I was saying, I was struggling in preparing for this conversation. I was struggling with finding this big thing that I'm redeeming myself for. Like, and what I recognized was like there are these redeeming moments for myself that I get to experience, and they don't have to be, these huge sort of monumental moments. They can be very small moments. And I love that the idea of like, missing the mark. Like I love that because it gives you the opportunity, like you said, to realign when you know you're missing. Redemption for me comes from a place of making sure that I'm aligned with myself in every moment that I'm living. And I miss sometimes, But what's beautiful for me is I always get to sit and observe what it is that's missing or what's not aligned. It's the moment in which I get to feel alive again. Like that's the thing for me. It's like when things are dull for me, it's like I know I'm missing the mark when things are dull. So I have the understanding, like, when I have the opportunity to observe redemption in this context, I have the opportunity to be alive again and to really like be with, the essence of who I am. And I get to have the opportunity to shift that too, you know. So, and forgiveness is a huge component of that for me. I love what you said about forgiveness being the seed, because I believe that's so true. In my experience, with my dad, right? I didn't have a relationship with him growing up. And what I recognized, back then was that my resentment and anger was affecting my life and not his. And this was back when I was, 24, 25. And I started to do the work to forgive him. And it took many years after that to get us to where we are today. So that was just a seed, and it's so cool to look back and observe that, because in my mind back then, when I offered that forgiveness, I thought things were going to change. I thought our relationship was going to change, and it didn't. Stuff still kept coming up for me. But what I'm recognizing now, looking back, it's like you said, it's the seed, and what it did was it opened up the first step to that process of getting to the place that we are now. I have a great, loving relationship with my pops now, and it's beautiful. And I don't think I would have been able to have that without that forgiveness, without that planting that seed first, and understanding, like, there's the patience of going through that process fully to get to a place where, I just started to recognize that I'm responsible for the way I want my relationships to be. No one else is. He's not, he's going to be who he is. And it's up to me to be responsible for the relationship that I want to have, you know? So it's like, I planted the seed of forgiveness, and then I expect him to change. It's like, it's like, no, that's not how that works. So I started to see, like, for myself, like, there was it all came from me. Like, it had to. It wasn't going to come from him. And what's beautiful about that is, along the way, as I started to take responsibility for how I wanted the relationship to be, he started to do the same in reciprocation. And that's the beautiful part about it. It was like this long process of getting to this place that we are now. And I guess that to me is like redeeming, in a lot of ways. And compassion is a big part of that, I think, because I don't think you can be in a place to have that redemption without having compassion for whatever the situation is that you're dealing with. Yeah, man, it's about just being happy in the heart, I think.
So much of what you said, I think, resonates. One thing I just want to champion you for are, the redeeming qualities, right, that you possess, as a human, and just as a man who navigates that relationship of healing and mending that, broken experience. Like, you're through taking responsibility for your part in that relationship, and bringing a sense of compassion, and bringing a sense of, there has to be a certain sense of assertiveness in that experience as well, like a calm yet confident approach to standing in your truth but also being willing to listen.
Yeah.
And I guess a question I have is, like, you mentioned compassion,
Mm-hmm.
and I mentioned assertiveness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which may or may not resonate for you, but like, if you had to choose like 4 or 5 redeeming qualities that you feel you possess that helped you through that process of redemption,
Yeah.
like, what would those qualities be? Compassion, and I mean, what are some of the
Yeah.
others?
It's a great question. Certainly compassion, responsibility was a big one. There's also understanding. What I started to recognize, and I had this conversation with my sister-in-law about how it is. There's many sides to a story, and the story that I always heard was from my mom's side. It was never his. And when I started to get curious about, well, what's your experience of this? I started to understand and see, like, one, like, he's a human being who's just trying to navigate this world just like everybody else is. And we make certain choices that may hurt people. We make choices that are maybe best for us and may hurt people. You may be in situations that you're no longer want to be in, and all of that is okay. And I think understanding that and being able to listen to that side of the story is incredibly important because we have this and it's a human quality where we want to hold on to our story about something and our desire to be right about something. Yeah, for me, it's really having the space to understand. And it doesn't mean you agree. It doesn't mean that you champion what they've done. It just really provides a space for expression, and it provides a space for understanding, like, oh, you've been through some stuff too. It's not just me. It's you've been through things, and you made choices based on those things, and I can never fault you for that. Like, it's your story. Like, who am I to tell you that your story is wrong as a human being? you know so yeah. So I think those are some of the qualities that I think of.
Compassion, responsibility,
Understanding.
Those are super redeeming qualities. Responsibility has been one of the most important qualities in my experience of redemption through recovery.
Say more.
Relapse is a part of the journey for a recovering addict. Statistically speaking, I don't know the exact statistic, but I think more often than not, someone who has gone through treatment is to relapses post-treatment. I would like to do some more research on that because it's something I'm really passionate about. But I know for a fact that more of the people that go into treatment and get through their program relapse post-treatment than don't. So relapse is a part of the journey for a recovering addict or alcoholic, and taking responsibility holds you accountable to whatever it is that you're taking responsibility for. And as an example, there's a group of guys that stay in a residential rehab facility downtown, and I volunteer there every Friday between 2 and 4 p.m. I lead groups. There's about 25 guys, and I'm with them for 2 hours. So we facilitate 2-hour long groups. And my last experience of relapse forced me to identify my sin, essentially, like the responsibility that I owe to the men in that treatment center, the responsibility that I have voluntarily bared upon myself, demanded accountability. And there was maybe 3 or 4 weeks that I went into the treatment center facilitated, spoke about recovery, but then left and got high and lived that double life and played out the pattern that I originally developed in my youth, between me and my parents. And there came a time where I had to like look in the mirror, right? Like look in the mirror at the man that I say I want to be. And I ultimately made amends with them. And I shared my truth. As a leader, I think it's important to acknowledge and own and recognize when we're wrong, or when we've quote unquote sinned. Because I don't think I was wrong. That's what's so appealing to me about the word sin. If somebody can, if you can remove the religious nature of the word sin and use it for what it is, to have sinned, for me to have sinned, and for me to identify that as an opportunity to be honest, courageous, willing to share that realization, and willing to invite them into my process and my experience of redemption. You don't have to go through that process alone. It's lonely to walk that road alone, Let's walk that road together. Eminem says, let's walk that road together through the storm, whatever weather, something like that. But so that was a really interesting process. But my responsibility to them, like I said, that I voluntarily, took on, is I think ultimately what compelled me to get clean again, So my recommendation, would be take on whatever responsibility, feels in alignment, or even whatever responsibility doesn't feel in alignment. Because when I first went into that treatment center, my partner is the one that invited me, because she initiated the opportunity and like helped develop the partnership. And then she was like, hey, I think you would be, this would be a good opportunity for you. I knew that there was opportunity for growth, but there was a part of me that resisted the opportunity, maybe out of fear for being incompetent or not knowing what the outcome would be. Because I'd never really done that before. I'd never led a room full of 25, 30 guys through a therapeutic, session. So I wasn't ready for that responsibility, but I took it upon myself anyway, and it was good for me.
Yeah.
So that resonates. Responsibility.
That's beautiful. It's interesting when we throw ourselves in the fire. I relate to that. Like, I relate to stepping into something new and like not knowing what am I capable of doing this or not? Well, how is that experience of taking responsibility impacted you as just a man? What has that changed for you?
Wow, what a great question. There's a certain degree of sacrifice that is required through the process of fulfilling a responsibility, in my experience. Right? I'm sacrificing comfort. I am sacrificing my Friday afternoon. I am sacrificing the opportunity to get high, right? Like, I mean, it depends on the way you look at it, but I think for me, like, taking on responsibility almost forces me to sacrifice anything that stands in the way between me and fulfilling the responsibility. So I think it's maturing me. I'm in a way, I'm sacrificing my youth, to be honest. Like, there's a lot of my childhood fantasy of being a world famous rock star that can have anything he wants whenever he wants it, that kind of ego-driven dream. Taking on responsibility and finding your place in the world, I think, challenges you to let go of what you want and assume the role and the position that you are being asked to step forward into.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean asked by something bigger than us.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know what that is, that's okay. You know, it doesn't have to be such a serious, you know, life-changing pursuit. If you don't know what you want, break it down to the basics, you know? Like, do you want to be respected?
Mm.
Do you want food on your table? You know, do you want shelter? Do you want friends?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want a relationship with your father?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, ask yourself what you want and bring it down to the most basic core elements of life. And eventually, like, the bigger picture of what you want will hopefully begin to unfold.
Mm-hmm.
But starting with those things at least gives you it gives you the opportunity to take responsibility for the actions that you need to take, like, in order to get there.
Mm-hmm.
If I want friends, I have to pick up the phone. Like, I'm responsible for picking up the phone and initiating some sort of contact.
Yeah.
If I want a relationship with my father, it's up to me to take ownership for the things that I've done and go make amends and apologize and say, you know, I made amends with my dad and I told him, look, there is no way that I could have possibly made it through, like, the things that I've done or been through and be in the place that I am today without you. You know, and he's not a very emotional guy, you know, so I told him, you know, part of my program of recovery is to make amends when to do so would not further hurt anyone else, right? So there's a number of people that I hurt in my life that to go back and ask for forgiveness and offer amends would just cause further damage, right? But taking responsibility for the amends and, you know, where I've gone wrong has helped me to kind of clean my slate, you know? So now I'm not carrying around all this junk, right?
Yeah.
And now that I've got kind of like a clean slate, a clean plate, like, now I can ask myself, what do I want? And, you know, identify the action steps that, you know, I need to go through in order to take responsibility and, like, move into that place, you know?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that was what you asked or...
Yeah, no. That's beautifully said.
I'm just talking.
No, that's what we're doing. That's what we're talking. Having a clean slate is incredibly important, you know? Because otherwise you're just dragging all this stuff with you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like having a muddy sort of windshield, you know. You have these wipers that don't work really well, but you just keep moving forward and the shit just stays there. But yeah, like, taking that responsibility, it helps in that process of, like, clearing stuff out so that you can then start to see and visualize and ask yourself the question, like, what is it that I do want in relationships or whatever the case may be. So that's super important. I wanted to ask you about your creativity. You have, as far as I know, you are this creative person. And not just in music, but also how you dress. Like, you just bring your own signature and style to things. And I was curious to know, like, how has your creativity changed since recovery and since redeeming that part of your life? How did that shift for you?
Post-treatment, my music and my creation process, I think, became more cohesive.
Mm.
There's more of, like, an underlying narrative and understandable message and kind of structure, because creation can be, like, such a messy process, right?
Yeah, sure.
There's no right or wrong way to create.
Right.
And that's beautiful. Like, that's one of the things I love about creativity.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the therapeutic, creative and therapeutic components of my treatment were experiential, like experiential arts, right? Mm. even being blindfolded. Like I highly recommend, blindfolding yourself with a blank canvas and, a bunch of paints, and just allowing yourself to feel through the process of touching paint and smearing it on a canvas. And, those types of things can be super healing. So it's interesting because there's a part of me that is so desperate to be heard. That part of me creates and organizes my thoughts in a way that are very tangible and kind of linear, right? And I channel that process and creation into my music now. It's a lot more methodical, right? Like prior to orienting myself like in with some sort of like moral compass, I would just kind of throw paint at the page and like call it good, like and there's nothing wrong with that, but it was more like lyrical acrobatics for me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to think of an example. Like pools of paint. I'm floating in outer space. I'm dying to get a taste, but why wait for fate? My plate's full with 88 goals, like getting family on the payroll and a dinner date with Play-Doh. So that's if I break those lines down, there's some continuity to it. It's pretty genius, if you ask me. Like pools of paint. So at the time, like I was kind of starting to move into treatment. I didn't want to go, but I knew I needed to. And paint was one of the things that was like getting me through it, man. Like paint was just like dipping my hands in buckets of paint just made me feel better. I don't really know how to explain it, which is super interesting because my parents like were so anxious about me getting paint on anything, like my clothes or the floor or like anything. I got paint over like all the furniture in my house. I was renting too, so it was like kind of destructive, but I needed it. So, pools of paint, right? That's what I was seeing in my environment. I'm floating in outer space, like, aren't we all? I'm dying to get a taste. Like, what is it that I want? I want fulfillment. I'm hungry for all these things that I need. I'm dying to get a taste. But why wait for fate? Like, I'm going to make this happen right now because anything I like, I want more of it and I want it now. Like, that's the kind of like, go addict part of me, Why wait for fate when my plate's full with 88 goals, like getting family on the payroll and a dinner date with Play-Doh? And it's cool, right? It's like, it's fantastical, which is, I think there's a time and place for it. Like fantasy can, serves a very specific utility in like helping us identify who we are in the hero's journey, right? Like if we can see somebody else's journey played out on the screen, maybe we can find bits and pieces of ourselves in it.
Sure.
And I was living in that land, when I was in active addiction, I was living in the land of fantasy. But post-treatment, so that was all pre-treatment, I'm still using my environment to create, right? I'm absorbing like different things that I'm experiencing and channeling them into my creativity. And there was nothing wrong with that. But post-treatment, there's much more of a like logical and understandable progression, right? Post-treatment, my music and my creation process is all about redemption. Like this is my process, The music and the creation, they're just tools for me to do the inner work. And as an example, I just dropped a song, it's called A Little Light. And that verse, just to, put it into perspective, there's a part of me that wants to be better. A born sinner. I'll look you in the mirror, purer than ever. I'm torn free for only 2 weeks. It's now or never. I'm an open book, invite you to read cover to cover. I was 13 the first time that I met her. I've been fiending for a fix ever since. I'd go get it while the world sleeps. You'd hope that I knew better, but I wasn't the type to think twice. Oh, brother. You know, like I speak those words to a room full of men in treatment and rehab. Some of them have just come out of prison. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I can't walk up in that place and say, pools of paint, I'm floating in outer space, I'm dying to get a taste. It's like, that's cool, but like, I need to speak a message that can be felt and understood and related to on a deep level.
Yes.
Within 5 seconds.
Yes.
You know?
Absolutely.
So post treatment, like, that's really what my music and what my creation is all about. It's the message, and how can I use the message to help the next guy, you know, into his journey and process of redemption.
That's beautiful.
You know?
That's definitely like a maturing of your art. It speaks to your growth, because it's not just about, like, yes, you want to deliver that message, but it's also about delivering it in a way that's succinct and clear, where it just gets through, like, really quickly, you know? That's beautiful. I love that. Well, this was a great conversation, my man. Yeah, I love spending time. We could talk for like hours. but yeah. Unfortunately cut it here. But thank you so much for joining me. Oh, I wanted to ask you one last question.
Yeah.
Grandma Freddie. Can you speak on that? Because I'll let you speak on that.
Man, that's a deep cut. Grandma Freddie, wow. Man, thank you for giving me a platform for that. Grandma Freddie was my mom's mom. She lived in Los Angeles, and I was her first grandchild. So she loved me, man. She loved me. And she was a Jewish woman, you know. She raised my mom and her sisters. And so, you know, she was always really proud of me, you know. She was at the bar mitzvah. She, you know, would always send, you know, cards in the mail. And that's probably the best thing I could say about her. So Grandma Freddie, she loved thank you notes. She loved thank you notes. And I hated writing them. You know what I mean? As a kid, I didn't like to write thank you notes,
sure,
you know? So, you know, when she passed, I like got the call that I got the call from my dad that she was in the hospital and that she was going to be okay and that, you know, everything's all right. And, you know, I turned to Hannah. No, I was alone at that point. And I thought to myself, I need to write that thank you note. That was the first thing I thought. I was like, damn, I didn't write the thank you note. You know, it was like a couple months late, you know? Yeah. So my plan was to go home that night and to write the thank you note and to like mail it out the next day. And then he called me like I mean, it was probably like 30 minutes later, you know, and said that she had passed. And so that was, you know, that was about 6 months ago here in 2022. And I still wrote it. I still wrote the thank you note. And I read it as a eulogy. And, you know, we buried it with her, and I wrote a song with her. You know, I don't know how anyone else feels about it, but she kind of spoke through me, and there's one of the songs on the record that I'm putting out in 2023. I feel that she kind of wrote, you know, through me and with me. So.
Beautiful.
Grandma Freddie, man, thank you. Yeah, thank you for asking. That means a lot.
Yeah, man. Yeah, that's beautiful. She's an ancestor now. She's with us, man. That's beautiful, man.
Well, thank you for having me. This was a good thing for me.
Yeah, beautiful, man. Thank you for joining me. Blake Mathews. I will list everywhere where you can find him on the show notes. But yeah, that's the homie. Check out his music, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your music. Yeah, talented, super talented dude, man. Love you, bro.
Love you too,
man.
Thank
you for joining me. Appreciate you.
Peace, everybody. Hope you enjoyed our conversation regarding redemption.
Here's Blake performing a new song off of his upcoming record. It's called Save a Soul. Enjoy.
It's been a minute since they took me to church. Purify my heart and put my hands in the dirt. I pray to make amends to all the people I hurt. I'm trying to hold a job down. I lied to make my pops proud. I've been sinning more than I should. I'm making what I can and giving back what I could. I'm doing my best to be a man of my word. I'm rising like the sun, but my tongue tend to talk for fun. But don't you worry, I ain't in a hurry. What goes up, come down. Yeah, I got people all around, but I'm all alone. I've been losing sleep trying to keep a home. SOS, thank God. If you could let it go, then I'll turn into gold. And then we'll take it on the road. You pray that I could save a soul. Don't run from the pain, be a friend to me. I hope you feel the faith in my energy. Yo, I keep you away from the enemy. Yeah, you can save a soul. The devil told me that she loves me. She told me that she's grateful. But love is but a ripened fruit of action. It don't hang low. I got a pattern of people pleasing my kinfolk. I'd rather eat in private like a king with my plate full. I pray dope fiends find serenity and peace. Security in something grounded deeper than trees. I've been burned way too many times to do it for free. Yeah, I'm recovering from taking too much LSD. I said I'm kinda like an open Bible. Lay it on the table, they been sleeping on me like the Walking Dead, this ain't a fable. I got faith, hope, and love in my heart for the haters. Yo, my family got my back, boy, this ain't no Cain and Abel, move in silence. Guess that's just the way I love. Actions speak louder than your language could. They want to see me on my feet making bread like pudding. A time when money ain't a thing, thank God. If you could let it go. I turn it to gold. Then we'll take it on the road. Yeah, you pray that I could save a soul. Yeah, don't run from the pain, be a friend to me. I hope you feel the faith in my energy. I keep you away from the enemy. Yeah, you can save a soul.
That was the homie Blake performing Save a Soul. Once again, I want to thank him for joining me in this conversation. I want to thank you for listening and stay tuned for more. Thank you. Peace.